All right, welcome everyone to Data Visualization and Accessibility, presented by Department of Disabilities Statewide IT Accessibility Initiative. Uh, Usual housekeeping items. We do have captioning available today. If you click the Show Captions button on your menu ribbon, should pop up for you. Do remember that Zoom does let you change the settings, so you can change the font size, and the text color to suit your preferences. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel hopefully in a few days, next week at the latest. And when it is recorded, we will send out the recording along with the slide deck in front of you. So you'll have all the materials. Lastly, I do apologize ahead of time. I'm getting over something. So I might get interrupted by coughing every now and then. Apologize for the noise. So with that, or as I say it, of course. Apologies to the captioner for that too. Um, In either event, lastly, feel free to put your questions in chat. I will try to monitor it as we go, depending on time. I will either address them as we go or at the end. So, uh, with that, let's talk about our key points today. So, the main things to remember with data is that it's very challenging to make accessible. So, a lot of the times, we're not thinking in terms of how do I make this one thing accessible. I'm thinking, what choices can I give the user? What alternatives can I develop? Um, Tables, summaries, lists, other forms that we can provide the same meaning or get the same message across that we were trying to get across in a chart. Second is offering different options for viewing data. This is a lot more applicable to online tools where we have the ability to interact with elements and change them. So, ability to have like a search engine or a sorting function, change the base map of a map that's displaying data points, switch views to a table, change what data is presented, filters, that kind of thing. The more tools you can put into the hands of the user, the more they can do with it and the more they can make sense of that information, as long as the tools work. And to the third point, maximize the powers of your tools. We're often limited by what tools we have available to us, Tableau, Power BI, high charts, power charts, any of these tools, Excel, any of these, a lot of them do have functionality for accessibility, but they're oftentimes limited to a certain edition or a certain version, like the developer version is very common, um, or more customizable versions where we can actually get into the code. And that's unfortunately where we can make the most difference. Other times, we're really just kind of trying to make the best of a bad situation. So, look at we'll cover some tips that we've picked up over the years here, but for the most part, think about uh, or look into the tool that you are using, what resources they have, either on their desk, their support center, or in the program itself that can help with accessibility. And then finally, ensure as much of your material works with assistive technology. If you're creating documents and such, your Word documents, you want to make sure that you're following proper procedures, making your tables have headers, um, that you're following best practices and avoiding things like merged cells or a lot of empty cells. With Excel, that you're formatting things as tables, that you're labeling sheets, that kind of thing. Uh, if you're working with online tools, you do a review. Either if you have the knowledge, feel free to try it yourself, run around it with just your keyboard, see how well it works just doing that, because that forms a lot of the basis for assistive technology and accessibility. But if you learn or if you reach out to subject matter experts like myself, we'd happy to take a look and tell you how it's going, what issues we're finding, and what you can do in order to try and make this better. So these are the key takeaways from today. Um, so keep these in mind as we go forward. So the conventional approach that you'll pretty much hear a lot of the time is make it a table. The reason for that is because tables at least give us some ability to maintain relationships between information. Uh, Proper headers, so a first row with that's marked as headers. If your data needs it, columns or a column of row headings as well. Those work really well. You can do that in Word, Excel, HTML, PDFs, what have you. So it's our really our best option for presenting data and such to users. So the reason for that, because like on screen, I have an example table. There's a bunch of empty cells, so not good. But the point is to demonstrate the uh, table headers. So we have a start box there. That's just like this is where the table starts. But then we have columns A through F and rows 1 through 4. So a screen reader, if they were in cell C3 and moved over to D3, the screen reader would tell the user that we're in, row 3, D, and then the data that's in that cell. So it will read the headers along with the data in that specific cell. And it's the best we can get right now in terms of communicating that information. And it's very important that we set up these headers. We talk a lot about it in our other webinars on specific programs. So I won't go into that much detail here. But all of them will usually have like, have a first row or first column, that kind of thing. Or when you format as a table, my data has headers. Oftentimes that header row will have filters as well. You can disable those depending on how you want to present your information. But the point is that takes a cognitive lift off of our users. They don't have to think about where in the table they are. They don't have to go back to the top to make sure they're in the right column. And then they don't have to go down row by row and like count off which row that they want to be in. It will tell them based on that. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that a user with magnification who can only see maybe a couple cells at a time, or someone who's a screen reader who has to read each box separately, we don't have a way for them to easily compare data that's far away, like A1 to F4. That would take several key presses to get to, or say a magnifier user would have to scroll right quite a bit and then down quite a bit in order to get to that cell. But there isn't anything we can do for that kind of comparison. That's where text summaries or other write ups are very helpful because that can communicate that information to that user, things that you want them to understand at a glance, or what you consider the most important things. Presenting that information outside of that table or data set, make sure that your message gets across. So, in documents, especially, that's where summaries really come into play. Um, you can put alt text on tables and such. It's generally not as useful because that gets read along with a lot of other things, or it gets read once rather when they get into the table the first time. So it really only helps with labeling what the table is. You don't really want to try and put key points into that because they will hear it once, but then they'll start moving around the data and they probably will forget it, or they might run out of they might have to try and recycle it. They might have to go back out and come back into the table in order to hear it again to make sure that they're hearing the right points. So it's best if it's a separate paragraph or summary or something like that. Um, the reason I start with tables is because honestly, a lot of the times, most of the people at least I've worked with, they start with their data already in a table. So what's really changed? They've moved the data from the table into the chart, and now I'm telling them put it back into the table. So that's where we have to think about again, what what are we trying to get across? If it's just we're presenting all of this information at once and then you use it, and then the original table, if they can get to it and you can make sure that it's in accessible format, like Excel with a proper table structure formatting, great. It means you've given them an alternative that will work for them. But In some cases, we need to put it back into the table or put the table into the same application so that a user can use like the filter functions and such to narrow down the table so they don't have to sort through that entire data set. We do have to put a little work onto the user simply because most of the time we have to reasonably assume someone who's coming to look at this data is just going to at least know how to make sense of it or know what to look for. We can't, there isn't anything we can do to kind of spoon feed that for them or give them those kind of short summaries. Apologies. So by giving them this table, at least, or a functioning table in there, in that application or whatever, alongside chart or other write ups, we give them more choices to go find more information on their own that they can read and make use of, but we give them what the main points are so that they can skip over it if they need to. So ultimately, I guess the main message here is that tables are really our best approach for handling data accessibly because it at least has some of the functions and tools that we can make use of. But, realize that it has limitations too, and you probably should add additional information to it. Now, charts are a much bigger challenge because how does that read to a screen reader? So, this was something a colleague of mine really pointed out that I have found the best way to explain it is that a chart you look at visually, you can look at any part, and then you can look at like that one line, drop down, and view one axis. Screen readers have to move through it in a linear fashion. So that means they have to read it by sections and parts. So they'll read the chart title because that's first, that's at the top typically. And then they'll probably run down the y axis and then across the x axis. And then they might read the legend. And then they get to line one and they move through each data point of line one. Then they're in line two and they read each data point of line two. And then line three. So we're requiring the user to have to remember where those data points are in relation to both x and y axis and in relation to other bars or lines or slices of a chart, a pie chart, anything like that. And there isn't a way that we can do the same relationship that we can do in a table where we can connect a header of a row and a column to a data point. That's the problem with charts. And that's why ultimately with charts, really our best alternative is to give users the way to get to a table, um, or change the view to a table or give them the data in another format because there we don't have, or at least I've never encountered, and just from what those I've talked to in this field, no one's really come up with a way that we can make that information more av- available essentially in a chart. And we can't give the users a way to get those quick summaries that I can get visually or you can get maybe visually if you're sighted. I can look at the chart and without even having numbers on this chart, I can see that, series 2 in category 4 is a lot lower. This is just an example chart, so it doesn't really have any information in it. It's just, 0 through 6 yeah, 0 through 6 on the y-axis. There's 4 categories and then 3 series, which are the lines. Um, but for, I can give that kind of summary to a person, but what do they get from that? And then I could put that maybe in alt text, but there's too much information in this chart, even with only, 3 lines with 4 categories. That's still, um, 12, 16 data points that I'm trying to communicate to someone. I can quickly see the difference between two data points. But a screen reader user or a keyboard user who's trying to focus each of those points to see what the exact number is has to move through them in linear fashion and remember the point that they want to compare to. So charts are a challenge that we don't really have a good answer to other than give alternatives. So remember that. You know, when we are talking about data in formats, that's why we always say, have multiple methods to view it because people process it differently too. This isn't just about screen readers. This isn't just about assistive technology. It's some people that chart works well, but other people want a table because they want to look through the information separately or they need the hard numbers. Yeah. So keep in mind that the chart, yeah, is a great way to summarize information, but sometimes you need to give it an alternative matter alongside of it for people to make sense of it and understand what you're trying to tell them. Now, I separate this out into data and documents versus data on a web portal or a web dashboard. The reason for that is because it's much more static in a document. There's less that we can do to manipulate it or change it. And we can only kind of set a single reading order for it. We don't have the ability to kind of, change filters and such. Oh, I see a question. Are you saying that if you have a chart, you must provide alt text or a summary? What I'm saying is that if you provide a chart, ideally you should provide a table presenting the same information alongside of it. And your alt text in your chart should tell us what that chart is about. So essentially its title. And then also, where is the table located? Is it the next figure over? Is it on another page? You know, anything like that. Um, the summary is really for the more the purposes of if there's a specific message you're trying to provide to people, or if there's like specific things that, specific uh, parts that are relevant to your report that you're publishing, that kind of thing. Those should be provided separately. The alt text of your chart should really only ever try to tell the user what the chart is about because it's too much information to try and put into alt text because the user is only going to hear it one time. And they might be able to, move back and then come back to the image and rehear it, but it's all in one go. If they stop in the middle, that's it. They lose the second half. So if you try to cram all that data or more points into or the summary into the alt text, it doesn't really work well. That's why I say keep it separate. I hope that answers your question. Um, so in that case, like in documents, that's where the summary kind of comes more into play because that's where we usually have or we're usually writing a report or something else. It's not just here's a table of data, good luck. Um, but by doing that, we can tell people here's kind of the main things that this chart should be telling you. Um, and then add that accompanying table, put it next to it ideally, because again, for some users, even if they don't have a disability or they have maybe a cognitive disability, it might be easier for them to understand, this chart goes with this table rather than having it on a separate page later in it. But and I realize sometimes you have to do it that way. So an appendix item, make sure there's a reference to it, either a footnote, the alt text of the image or the chart should tell the user, go to page 15 for the table version of this. So things like that, or appendix A, whatever. It just make sure to direct users to where they can get this information in another manner. And then finally, ensure your document's readable because that's a key part of this. That's mostly applicable to PDFs. So like on screen here, there's a pie chart I created for a demonstration years ago. Each of those boxes on it around like the heading and each data point and then the summary is the reading order. This example was supposed to show you how the heading was kind of separated out from the chart itself, and then also how you could readjust it. But the point here was I made sure that a user with a screen reader or keyboard access or whatever ran through the data points in sequence. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So on screen, you can see data point 1 is in box 6 and its percentage, which you can't really read, is under 7. And then 8, 9 is data at point 2. And then the summary is after that. And then the summary kind of gives us that short explanation of what this chart is, which is really just, here's 4 data points using color, along with using lines to visually tell someone where this information goes to. So this is the other thing with data in charts too, is it's not just, I've been talking a lot about reading order and uh, screen reader usage in AT because that's really the main question I get is, how can I make this accessible for something like this? Because visual medium into a non-visual medium. But there's also things to consider like color and labeling. You know, just having a pie chart with separate color doesn't help because someone who's colorblind is going to struggle with associating those colors. You know, someone who, especially if I had more data points and then similar shades of, I might have had, uh, if I can get my mouse over here, there we go. Oh no, you can't see it. Um, if I had, a second, a fifth data point, let's say, and I was using a dark blue across from data point 3, that would be a struggle for someone who is colorblind with blue yellow color blindness. And the only my ways I can deal with that are I can either do what I've done here, where I have lines pointing from the data point to its slice. I could have put the text inside those slices if I have space so that they're clearly labeled. Or I can use either icons or texture in order to do the same thing, where my legend uses separate symbols for each data point and then has those symbols in its corresponding slice. So color is one way, but it can't be the by all end all. You have to have something in addition to color. But then having either like dots, texture, lines, dashes, that kind of thing, or some other kind of visual association through like the lines I have on screen or icons that match, anything like that also helps those who can't access that information because of other color blindness or some other visual acuity issue. And it also reinforces it for regular usage. So anyone who's looking at that chart can make that association through different means and whatever works best for them. They might not even be aware. So those are all things to keep in mind too, is we need to make sure that we're communicating things in multiple manners. Another example is this chart here I made, stock investment growth. I pointed this out originally in another webinar talking about how I can, how you can describe this audibly. So for purposes of matching that, this chart has 3 categories, 3 stocks, just, blue, green, and red, even though the colors don't match. Realize that. Um, but there's 5 years, and then their values. And the value runs from 0 to 1,000. But each data point has its number on it. So you have the exact value available instantly. Now, I will say this is not the best chart, but it's one I could do fairly well in Word. I created this in Word. So it's a chart that's at least usable because we have lines separated by texture, not just color. So you have, a dot and a dash, and then you have, dashes, multiple dashes. But then each data point also has a number. Now, I have also added a table that has the exact same information next to it. And you have the stock and the year as headers so that, and then the blue, green, and red is also a first column so that if we are looking at red year 4, we will hear, you know, column 4, no, sorry, column 5, year 4, row 4, red, 340. So that, or 340. So the user hears exactly what year 4 the red stock was, and then they can go find, blue stock year 4, and mentally they have to remember to compare 340 to 130, but they at least have a way to do that. They couldn't do that with the chart. Now, but a sighted person who maybe has color blindness could look at the chart and get that same information, but still have the exact numbers rather than that chart I showed you earlier that was just simple dots. So I hope that was that made sense to everyone. This is all about just offering as many possibilities to users as we can, because we can't make one thing work for everyone. So now let's get into the online portion, dashboards, maps, that kind of thing. So data dashboards are becoming very popular because it's a great way for organizations to show information in both a visually appealing manner and a way that they can really summarize a lot of the information that they're collecting and presenting to the public. The problem with a lot of dashboards is that they're very complicated. And this is something that we have to pay attention to. And I, would recommend, again, looking at whatever tool you're using. In this case, this demographic snapshot is from a state agency that was collecting information, and they put it on Tableau. So the thing to remember here is that we want to set a tab order for reading, and we want to use labels for our groups, because a lot of the times, a lot of these dashboards work by groups. So in this case, visually, we have separations for the population age, for the living with a disability, age 65 plus, the living below poverty level, age 65 plus, and so forth. Programmatically, if I was walking through with my keyboard or with a screen reader or something like that on the actual dashboard, I would probably go to that section, that first one, population age 60 plus, and then I have to enter it in order to start using it. So essentially, if I was just moving element by element, it'll probably go from population age to living with a disability age. But because visually, we have that divider line, programmatically, it might not though. It might move from living with a disability to race and ethnicity age, 65 plus. That's the kind of thing you need to check, because is that okay for a user to do? Or do you want a user to go through the left side first, the column first? Because the right side might have information that's dependent on the information from the left. Apologies. So by making sure that we look through that reading order, we make sure that a user is able to look at the information they want, or look in the information that they kind of should before they get to other information, or that would make logical sense. Because if I, jump from, living with a disability to race and ethnicity, and then back to living below poverty level, but I'm using tab, I'm sighted, but, I can't use a mouse. Maybe, I've injured my hand, or I have Parkinson's and I'm too shaky to use it properly. So I'm using my keyboard just to move through things. I expect it visually to go downwards, but instead it moved right. And I'm going to be like, what just happened? So it's things like that. Labels for groups is important because, again, we want to make sure that programmatically information is grouped both contextually, visually, but then also to tell people this is what this is about, this is what this chart is about. If you're inside this chart and reading its parts, all of its parts are relevant to this. And then finally, ensuring proper color contrast. This is mostly about the textual labels and the icons or explanations of things. It's not so much about the chart itself. The reason I say that is because a lot of the times people working with data have very set national standards or industry standards they have to meet in order to present that information. And we can't control that. It would be great if we can and we can make it accessible, but I realize that at the same time, I can't tell you how to, no, you have to change the heat index in order to make it accessible. This is how a heat index is communicated through shades of, red and orange and yellow. So in those cases, again, we're concerned more with the textual labels and that information and making sure that that's contrast compliant so that someone can read it and see it separately from the colors on the bar chart or something. So like in this case, the 2020, that's a problem. Up at the top there under population age, the third bar, because it's white on a kind of lighter blue. That's probably not contrast compliant and should be changed. The 2040 is a lot clearer because it's white on a very dark blue. So what we probably want to do is instead change the 2020 to black text or change the shade of blue, maybe if we can. It depends on what tools we have in our power. Maybe we have to just add a background to the 2020. And so the bar is still light blue, but the 2020 might have like a just little black box behind it to help enhance the contrast. Sometimes it's, we need to offer the option for a user to enable some kind of color contrast option. Some of these tools allow that because while we can't change how the data is presented because of industry standards, the tool that they're viewing it through might offer the user the ability to change these things manually. And that can work as well. And you just need to make sure that the user has access to that. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're using very clear labels that are programmatically associated. So it's kind of like, if you think about a form field or something, same idea. Um, or how in our previous example, we had a line pointed to it. Visually, sure, that tells us this goes to that chart part. But if I look at this chart part, usually with a lot of these dashboards, I can go and look at individual bars in order to see more information, either through focus or hover. Focus is better because that means keyboard use works. On hover is not that good because it's only a mouse. But if I go to that with a screen reader, then I want to be able to hear those labels. So in this case, population age 60 plus. If I go into that chart, so I press enter in order to enter that group, and then I start moving through the parts of it, what I want to hear is 2040, 26.57%, 2030, 26.15%, because each bar is focused in order, but it has two textual labels that go with it. And I want those to work with that so that I can hear it as I move through the chart. And I don't have to hear bar one and then 2040 and then 26.57% and then bar two, and then the next part, and the next part. Or I don't have to hear bars one, two, three, and then hear 2040, 2030, 2020, and then hear each individual number and have to associate those in my head. Most of the time, that's kind of baked into the program that you're using, but it's something to be aware of is that it can be a limitation. Tableau, for instance, its free version doesn't allow that. So we're kind of at the mercy of the fact that it's just going to assign a reading order, usually left to right, and we have to realize that's going to be a limitation of the tool. And in those cases, we should maybe try to find another tool. Um, but it is something to be aware of, or we need to present an alternative because we don't have the budget for another tool. So, all right, here's this information in the snapshot. But then here's another place you can download this information in the text format and tables, anything like that. Just another alternative that gives us the same meaning as this dashboard that we've set up. Most of the dashboards will usually have some kind of way a user can download the original data set. A lot of these will depend on the program itself, so let's talk about those individual ones. Esri is a big one to talk about. Um, The big things to remember with Esri, and this is more applicable to kind of all of them, all of their products, because some of their products have more capabilities than others. Their enterprise edition, for example, since you can actually mess with code, you can actually do a lot to enable additional functionalities. But if you're using just like the base story maps or the base, the smaller presenter, I forget the name of it, um, those don't have as much functionality that you can offer a user. So keep that in mind, is that sometimes your alternatives are part of the program. Other times your alternatives have to be separate because that's the best you can do. But with Esri, main thing we want to keep in mind is we want to enable the ability for a user to change the base maps so they can make something that works for them, because Esri offers a high contrast, two different versions of high contrast or other types of maps that can be used as the base map. So a user has the ability to select what works best for them. And then we also have the ability to have a table view or access the table with the data set, usually with filters. And that is our best alternative in an Esri tool, is to give users the ability to get to that and to manipulate it. I've done a lot of testing on Esri tools, and in most cases, that's a decent method. It's there's always going to be problems with this kind of medium, um, but by giving users a quick way to get to that tool through a button available on the menu ribbon, or I'm sorry, to the table through that button. In this case, this screenshot from an Esri map I grabbed off of the Open Data portal. Um, I think this is, I forget what the data is showing, but it's all one single type of thing, which is why they're all the same blue circle. But the problem is that there are hundreds of these throughout the state of Maryland. I think it might be like um, I think it was some agriculture thing, like some certain kind of farm or something like that. In either event, might have been automotive. In either event, it's all one type of, let's say, farm. The problem is that if we wanted a user to move through this map individually, either hovering over it, you've got to zoom in order to, I mean, you had zoom functionality, but you have to try and pick out a data point from all of these. And that's where the table with the filters option really comes in handy. Um, in this case, there's also the search function up in the top right. There's a eyeglass icon. And if you click that, or a screen reader finds it, it'll say search. Giving users that ability to narrow down the field is phenomenal. Um, that came up a lot with, if you remember, the COVID vaccine center or treating center, I'm sorry, testing centers. Those always had like a search function. You still find that on a lot of the days now, with agencies. Uh, Sometimes we'll have like a list option on the left and start searching through and filtering results. That is a great alternative we can offer users, because then they don't have to interact with the map, but the map is still there. The map might zoom in on a part when based on their search, but all of that gives us functionality that gives the user ability to get information in a way that works for them. That's the idea with the base maps and the tables, is we're giving users choices. A couple other things to keep in mind with Esri when you're using it is try to avoid stylizing your text. A lot of the times that can interfere with readability on it. Um, in most cases, you want to use kind of more of a default view, or you want to make sure that you're using like a high contrast version, like black text with maybe a white outline or something. But try to avoid doing more than that, or trying to filter information based on stylizing text, because that might make it harder to read, and in cases of things starting to overlap because of points, that can also be problematic. You do want to limit your use of patterns. We've talked about that. Patterns are great, but when you start having 7, 8, 9, 10 categories of data, it starts to get overwhelming for a user. And one of the nice things about Esri is that usually you have the ability to turn some of those off or on, or filter those out. And that helps a lot. But you keep that in mind is that if you can't give that functionality to users, try to limit the use of your patterns to only a couple because the more you have to create and the more overlap you have, the harder it is for them to comprehend it or make sense of it, or they might get overstimulated. So generally the idea is, keep to a maximum number of like 6 to 7 is the general rule. Um, giving users the ability to change those filters or, sort categories helps alleviate a lot of this. Yeah. Sorry. Um, but that's something to keep in mind is by doing this, we give users the more choice, the more power we can give users, the more accessible we can make this at as best as we can. Some tips for Power BI. Things comes up a lot in my work because there's a number of groups that are using Power BI. Um, one of the fellows that we worked with a year ago put together a great guide. So those of you in the state who work with Power BI, please do reach out. Be happy to share that. Uh, but he made note of a few things that I would like to share with all of you. First is in order to control some of these things, you do need to use the desktop app of it. That's a problem we've noticed with other tools as well. Tableau, you need the higher end version, the developer version. Esri, you need the enterprise version to control a lot of these things. Otherwise, you're kind of stuck. But with this one, when you're in it, you can set a tab order, a reading order. So if you go to view and then selection, and then there's a tab order choice, and then you can use that. It'll give you a selection pane, and you can kind of move it up and down, kind of like you would in PowerPoint. And when you're using that, you can set essentially kind of groups and then options and how you move through things, and that's great because you can set how you want a user or expect a user to move through your dashboard. When you're testing it though, do remember Power BI can be a little clunky because you might use tab in order to move from thing to thing, but it's not going to, when you're first just moving through groups, it's not going to move into the parts of it. So like if you have like a section with a drop down for like a filter or a selection and a table, it'll view that all as one thing. It'll just move to the next. In order to enter that group and start using it, you have to tab to it so it'll be outlined. Press enter in order to move into it, and then tab again will start kind of treat it kind of like a smaller website in a bigger website is the best way to put it. Because you'll move into that group, work inside that group, either change the drop down or move through the table and read it. And then you have to press escape to move out of it and then go back into kind of the bigger flow. So keep that in mind with Power BI is that it's a bit clunkier, but it does have this option. So we can make it fairly usable. It's not the greatest, it's not the smoothest experience, but it's something that users can use. And the nice thing about it too is that there are built-in shortcuts. Um, and then it does give the option when you first move into a Power BI dashboard. Uh, it'll bring up a list of options and you can open the keyboard shortcuts. One big one that we like to point out to users is Control plus Shift plus F11 because Power BI lets you, instead of having to put the chart next to the table, you can switch the view of it as you're looking at it. So you can switch any chart or map to the table that shows its data set. So it gives us some more options there. And then finally, it does give you the option to configure a mobile view, which a number of tools don't. So keep that in mind. And then also keep that in mind because that's important because when you are viewing, a dashboard on your phone, you're kind of limited to this screen width versus the desktop there. Or, you can maybe view it like this, but it's a lot more narrow. You might need to change how information is presented. And so instead of forcing a user to, pinch and zoom in several times in order to view something. In some cases, also you want to set it up so that it's not like a dashboard that's crazy smushed together, where you can maybe filter through different views or something to view parts of it. It, it, just keep in mind that you do want to set up a mobile view uh, as well, and Power BI gives you that tool. Um, Esri is a bit different in that regard because usually it kind of has a built-in already system to it. Um, it's definitely worth looking at. I'm not as familiar with it, so um, if you want more information about that, reach out and I will do my best to get it for you. But it is something to keep in mind is that mobile views need to be configured separately because you're dealing with an application instead of like the website and the content management system handling it for you. Some other tools I want to mention. Um, Tableau, I've already mentioned it a few times. I do want to point out that if you use the free version or whatever the lowest cost is, there are major issues. One of we've run across that before where a user does not have the ability to set a reading order. So that's only something that's available when you're using the paid version, the desktop version. So be careful with that and make sure to have an alternative planned when you start setting up a dashboard. High charts is an option. The Board of Public Works did something, and they worked with the National Federation of the Blind in order to make sure that their dashboard was um, accessible, which is fantastic. But the problem with it is that it does require an actual developer and a data scientist because there's a lot of customization you can do, but you got to have someone who knows how to do it. And that's usually the issue that we run into is that, we need a data scientist and a developer and a team in order to make the most of these tools. Parrot charts is another option. They do something interesting, which is very nice that they use machine learning, a local running system in order to generate multiple summaries and change viewing options. So you can change the color scheme of the chart. You can have it generate different summaries based on kind of preset questions, um, that kind of thing. It's something that we've looked into to some degree on our own. Um, I have been working with the Department of IT and with the governor's innovations team to see if we can do something kind of similar for a lot of our data sets in the state where we could kind of generate an FAQ on the fly that could give you kind of short summaries to things of charts and data sets, and would maybe use AI in the background in order to, as data sets change over time and years, it could regenerate those summaries without us having to manually write them. Um, I should probably mention that too. I'm thinking about it is, AI does offer some options here, but it's all experimental right now. So don't don't trust AI to be your solution here either. It does give the ability to summarize, which can be very useful, especially for users who are having trouble with it because of accessibility issues. But you can't guarantee the AI is going to get across the point that you wanted to make originally, especially if it's, you're not just presenting data, but you're presenting data in a particular presentation or format. So be careful with, the use of AI. And then finally, there is another one I know of called XR Navigation, which it's a company founded by a blind person, um, and it's a mapping system that it uses the same data sets off of like Esri or Tableau or whatever, but it has audio navigation built into it. So that means it's audibly describing locations as you're moving around. He originally built it for use on a school university campus, but he's since expanded it to a lot of other options. So that's more for mapping than it is for data visualization, but I know he's exploring the concept as well. Um, there's a couple other tools out there that have looked into sonification of data. So using like a piano octave to try and show comparisons between data points as you move through a chart. Um, it's I've gotten mixed results with that. From what I've heard, some people really love it. Other people don't. So it kind of becomes a personal preference. So not something you can say that this is the answer. But again, it's another tool that we have in the toolbox available for people to try out and use. And I guess if there's anything to take away today, it's give users a toolbox because you can't give them a one size fits all solution. Finally, some consistent challenges that we still face and we're probably going to face for a long time. A lot of these tools have rather clunky interfaces. They require multiple inputs in order to accomplish something. Or changing your interaction method, like Power BI, where we need to go into a group, press enter, use arrow keys to select, sorry, to select a drop down or a filter, and then go from there. So this isn't something we have an answer to. It's something that we need to look at and see how well can we streamline this? How good can we make this experience for users? But realize that this is a limitation, that these interfaces, because we're dealing with these huge data sets or these really complicated charts, and users have to move through individual charts. And if they want to see like a data point and its specific information, they have to move through all of them to get the tooltip, and then the tooltip has to be readable, all of that. There isn't a good way for us to say, go to this point, I want this point, open that, done. I haven't really seen a tool do that there or do that well. So keep that in mind is that if you are trying to give people quick access to information, consider another option. Lists, a search function where they can pull up just a single result, things like that. A lot of these interfaces are more for the purposes of here is the data, make of it what you will. We're always going to still demand more of a cognitive lift from our users to make sense of the information for the reasons I just gave. That ultimately we kind of have to lean on them to be able to make sense of it, especially if we're just simply presenting here is the data of the last year's census. I don't know what you're looking for. So here are the tools in order to look for that information, and good luck. If you are using it in a specific report or format, that's where that summary kind of comes into play because they can go look at it maybe separately, either in another source or in a different format, and look at more information and try to make their own interpretations. But the interpretation you want them to get, you need to give them directly because they'll probably not get it on their own looking at that chart because they don't look at it in the same manner that you do. And then finally, I've mentioned the limitations of the tools, and sometimes our budget and our options they just aren't there. And again, sometimes it comes down to what is the best you can do. The text options that you can give, summaries. In some cases, it's if you're working with something older that you don't have the source for, and in those cases, you're just going to have to give users what you can give them and make sure that you're available to answer questions as they come up. With that, any questions? um, and this is something that we're still working on. The Department of IT's data office and GIS office have put together a chat in order to share accessibility info. I've been working with them for years, since like 2021. Um, we've been working with other organizations, Department of Planning. I just did a presentation for them. I wonder if any of them are on right now. um, Things like that. It's something that we're always looking at ways we can make this better. So if you have questions or you want to know more, please reach out. I apologize. um, our email is mdod.nva@maryland.gov. Our website is mdod.maryland.gov. On the left, under resources, is the IT Accessibility Initiative. That's our link. You can go to our webpage, find out more. Can you share information about that chat you mentioned, if that's available to state agencies? You'll need to reach out to the data office because they handle it. I am just a member, so I can't invite people. Don, I'm sorry, Don Blanchard is who you want to talk to. Will the recording be shared? Yes. We will post it to our YouTube channel. I will hope to get it up by Friday. If not, look for it next week. But if you've registered and you're attending, you will be emailed with the link and the slide deck. So all this information will be available to you there. We do that with all of our webinars. So if you ever need to look for something, check our YouTube channel or reach out to our email, and we will try and get that information to you. For those of you in the state, be happy to set up a consultation and talk. For those outside the state, I'm happy to try and answer questions as best as I can. I apologize for my coughing. I'm getting over it, but today has been a lot of presentating. So, presentating, that's a word. Thank you, everyone. All right, well, if there's no questions, I'm going to stop the recording.